So I want to go over Packers GM Brian Gutekunst post-draft press conference, what he had to say about the different moves the Packers made in the draft, why they didn't target certain positions, and tons of different things regarding the draft. And with the draft now being officially in the books, we finally have an idea of what the Packers and GM Brian Gutekunst plan to do going forward to sort of build around Jordan Love, which is exactly what they did in this draft, giving him 5 different weapons. But now let's get into some of these comments that he had to say about this Packers class and a few other things as well. So I'm looking at some notes that were posted by PackersWire.com by Zach Kruse, basically summarizing and giving the most interesting points from his press conference. I watched the press conference, but this article, PackersWire.com, gives a good overview of exactly what he had to say. So first off, he said, great 3 days, felt really good about it. So did I, so that's good to hear that, he probably felt good about it considering they were his picks. Then he said on taking 13 players, he said, I loved it for a number of reasons. He said the Packers didn't have to wait long to make picks. It's going to create great competition, is what he said. And then he goes on to discuss Jordan Love's 5th-year option, which does have to be decided by on Tuesday, which is now 2 days away. So the Packers have to decide if they want to exercise that option. If it is exercised, and that means come 2024, he'll count about $20.7 million against the salary cap, or $20.27 million against the salary cap. But the Packers will have to see if they want to do that. And he said we are still working through it, so they haven't fully come out and said what they plan to do. I assume he has a good idea about what the plan is, but we'll see if the Packers do it or not by Tuesday. And then he also said it's a lot of money for a guy who hasn't played, but at the same time, we're moving forward with him, so we'll figure it out. And Aaron Rodgers back in 2008, the Packers gave him his new contract about halfway through the season. So I'm curious to see if the Packers do a similar thing with Jordan Love. Will they decide to not exercise the option and then wait and see how he plays in 2023 and then decide if they want to pay up and pay him a longer, a bigger contract? The only issue is they could end up having to pay him more money than if they were to lock in his 5th-year option. So we'll see what they decide to do. Then he goes on and he talks about the not drafting offensive linemen in this draft. And he said that the Packers like the depth that they already have on the offensive line. And he said that they already have 13 players under contract on the O-line. And he was worried that the guys he drafted maybe later in the draft when they maybe had an opportunity to take an offensive lineman, he didn't think they'd be able to beat out the guys they already currently have on the roster. So I'm not too worried that the Packers didn't target offensive linemen. They pretty much already have the same group coming back from last year. And they have some depth pieces as well, depending on who starts. We've got Bakhtiari left tackle, Elton Jenkins left guard, Josh Myers center, Runyon right guard, and then Zach Tom potentially, or Josh Nijman at right tackle. And they can use, Tom somewhere else or Nijman somewhere else. They also have Caleb Jones, a few other guys as well. So we're pretty stacked on the O-line already, so Gutekunst didn't see the need to draft a player when he thought we already had, enough depth there. Then he discusses how he said this: one of our goals was to add pass catchers and skill players, which they definitely did. And I think that many of us expected and hoped that that's what the Packers would do in this draft. Just bring in tons of talent, tons of receiving talent to help Jordan Love. And we did that with a 2nd-round receiver, 5th-round receiver, 7th-round receiver, and then 2 tight ends as well. And then discussing the decision to take a kicker in this draft, and Anders Carlson. Apparently, Rich Bisaccia, the Packers special teams coordinator, has experience with Anders Carlson's brother, Daniel Carlson, when he played in Las Vegas and when Bisaccia was in Vegas. And apparently, Anders Carlson struggled a little bit in 2021 and 22 because he had tons of different injuries. But he said this, quote, "We felt really good about where he's headed," end quote. And then Bisaccia apparently also spent time with him at Auburn, and Bisaccia felt really good about the pick, and so Brian Gutekunst said that they had confidence in him as well. And now on to discussing the defensive tackles, Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks. He sort of discussed their pass rushing skill sets, how they have the versatility to play sort of anywhere along the offensive or the defensive line. And he said, quote, "Pass rushers, right? Both of those guys have extensive skill sets to rush the passer. I think they can go up and down the defensive line and rush the passer." And then he also was asked about, the sort of the reason for drafting tons of defensive linemen who have tons of speed and quickness. He said this: Sam Saley, who I think works in the scouting department, likes to say speed kills. Athleticism, speed, quickness. And Gutekunst said, guys on defense we took in this draft have that. So the Packers did add some defensive tackles who have that speed, especially in Colby Wooden, who maybe is slightly smaller for a defensive tackle. He could add some weight. But one of the Packers assistant coaches mentioned how in today's NFL, when you have all these, athletic rushing quarterbacks, you need your defensive linemen to be able to, track them down, chase them down. And so obviously it helps to have guys who are a lot faster there. Then discussing Jaden Reed, the second-round receiver from Michigan State, he said, even though he's slightly smaller than the typical receiver the Packers draft, Reed is 5'11", 187 pounds. He said that he plays bigger and wins contested balls. And if you watch his highlights, Jaden Reed, you can sort of see that he does play bigger than he looks at 5'11". So the Packers were fine sort of going a little slightly smaller than typical because of that. And then he was asked about drafting versatile players regardless of which position it is. And he said that guys need to be able to do multiple things. And he mentioned how back in the day when Ted Thompson was around, that they like to always have those versatile guys. So if there are injuries, guys can more easily fill in and switch around. And so we've seen the Packers for a long, long time draft players who have the versatility, whether that's offensive linemen who can play guard and tackle, whether that's defensive linemen who sometimes can play, inside or outside, corners who could also potentially flip to, nickel or safety at times. It's nice to have guys who have that versatility. Then asked about the decision to draft a quarterback, Sean Clifford, in round 5, he said this, quote, started a lot of games in the Big Ten, a lot of experience, really good athlete, like his arm talent, brought him in for a pre-draft visit, and really liked the makeup of the person, end quote. And he said that at that point in the draft, a lot of different quarterbacks went off the board, and he said when looking at his draft board, they didn't really like anyone else at quarterback who was left at that point, and so they decided to take Sean Clifford because of what they sort of see in him. They think that he's a pretty intelligent guy, smart guy, and he has a ton of big game experience, and so they seem to have confidence in him from their, from their scouting work and all that kind of stuff. And he said that at that point in the draft, they had lots of other options at multiple positions for certain positions, so he didn't feel too worried about not drafting one of those players because they had a lot more options, where with quarterback, Clifford was basically the last guy that they really liked at that point in the draft. And considering we only had 2 QBs on the roster, he wanted to add a third QB to this room to have as a backup there with Danny Etling alongside Jordan Love. And then if we move on to talking about 7th round safety, Anthony Johnson Jr., who seems like a steal, he said this, one thing that really sold us on him was top of the football character, the way they talk about him there. And from what I've seen about Anthony Johnson, he seems to play super hard. There was one play I saw where he chases this guy down who's about to score, comes in, forces a fumble, and that sort of seems like the kind of player he is. He plays hard, he plays tough, he plays physical, and the Packers seem to sort of like the kind of guy and player that he is. And then if we move on to, he discusses, staying on the safety discussion, he talked about signing some different veteran guys before the draft, bringing back Rudy Ford, who honestly played pretty good in his short time at safety for the Packers in 2022. Also, Dallin Levitt, they brought back Tarvarius Moore from the 49ers. So he said that they knew the safety class wasn't super strong, and because of that, they brought back some of these veterans just in case they didn't find a guy, early that they wanted to draft. And so that's sort of how they are sitting right now. And he was also asked about Packers, former safety Adrian Amos, who is currently a free agent. Of course, spent the past, 4 or so seasons with the Packers, been a very solid starter. And he said, we're not going to close the door on that. And he said the Packers have been in communication with Amos. So the Packers could decide to bring Amos back, depending on, what those contract talks could go like. And then to finish it off, discussing trades, he says, discuss making trades for future picks, but the right deals never materialize. And he said he thinks Packers are likely to have 11 picks going into next year, considering comp picks. So we'll have another, solid batch of draft picks next season as well. And he mentioned that at the end of this draft, lots of times, you can trade away picks, maybe move up a little bit, or potentially get some more capital for 2024. And he said they had so many guys they still really liked, and so they were willing to stay and draft, in the 6th and 7th round. So those are the biggest highlights from the Brian Gutekunst post-draft press conference. And as I said, that was from lots of that summary was from PackersWire.com. Great site. They gave lots of quick short articles on everything that's happening for the Packers. But that's all I wanted to cover in this video, so I appreciate you guys watching as always. If you want to stay up to date with all Packers news, feel free to subscribe down below. But that is all for this one, and I'll see you guys next time.